On our wedding anniversary, my husband turned to me in front of everyone and said, "I wish you had never been in my life." The next day, I sold the house, closed all the accounts, and disappeared. Before we continue, don't forget to write in the comments which country you're from and how old you are. Enjoy listening. The Moscow Grand Hotel stood like a citadel of wealth in the heart of the city, its golden facade glowing against the crisp October night. Inside, the grand ballroom was a vision of opulence, its crystal chandeliers casting prisms of light that danced across the polished marble floor. It was October 6th, 2015, my 10th wedding anniversary with Dmitry Volkov, and the room buzzed with Moscow's elite. Business tycoons in tailored suits, politicians with guarded smiles, and socialites draped in furs and jewels. Their laughter mingled with the clink of champagne flutes and the soft strains of a Tchaikovsky waltz played by a string quartet. I, Anastasia Volkova, stood at the center of it all, my crimson gown shimmering like liquid fire under the lights. My dark hair, swept into elegant waves, framed a face that hid the quiet exhaustion of a decade as Dmitry's wife. Dmitry, with his chiseled jawline, piercing blue eyes, and impeccable black suit, was the epitome of power and charm, a man who could command a room with a glance. To the world, we were the perfect couple, a love story born in the romantic haze of St. Petersburg, now cemented in wealth, influence, and a carefully curated image of marital bliss. I stood beside him, my hand resting lightly on his arm, my smile practiced but genuine. The crowd hushed as Dmitry took the microphone, their glasses raised in anticipation of a toast that would celebrate our love, our life, our unshakable bond. I expected words of devotion, a public reaffirmation of the vows we'd made 10 years ago in a candlelit church by the Neva River, with snow falling softly outside. I could still remember that day, the way Dmitry's voice had trembled with emotion, the way his hands had held mine as if I were his entire world. Now, as he turned to me, I braced for a moment that would warm my heart, a reminder of why I'd given him everything. Instead, his voice sliced through the room like a blade, cold and deliberate, and, "Anastasia," he said, his blue eyes glinting with something I couldn't name, anger, disdain, or something darker. "I wish you had never been in my life." The words landed like a physical blow, stealing my breath, my heart lurching in my chest. The room fell silent, a collective gasp swallowing the festive hum. My mind scrambled to make sense of what I'd heard, searching his face for a trace of humor, a flicker of the man who had once promised me forever under the stars in Peterhof's gardens. But there was nothing, just a stone-cold mask, his lips set in a thin line. My sister, Natasha, stood in the front row, her hand covering her mouth, her hazel eyes wide with shock. My mother-in-law, Irina, sat nearby, her silver hair pulled tight in a bun, her lips curling into a smirk that sent a chill down my spine. It was as if she'd been waiting for this moment, her disapproval of me, always veiled behind polite smiles, finally laid bare. The crowd's gazes bore into me, a mix of pity, curiosity, and barely concealed glee. I felt their eyes dissecting my every tremble, my every breath, as the weight of Dmitry's words pressed down like a vice. I wanted to scream, to demand an explanation, to shatter the silence with my rage. But my body betrayed me. I stood rooted to the stage, the spotlight burning my skin, my crimson gown suddenly feeling like a costume in a play gone horribly wrong. Dmitri turned and walked away, his polished shoes clicking against the marble, each step echoing in the hollow space where my heart had been. The whispers began, a low hum that swelled into a cacophony of gossip. "Poor Anastasia," someone murmured from the crowd. "How humiliating," another hissed, their voice laced with cruel amusement. "Did you see her face? She's broken," a third voice added, dripping with satisfaction. Natasha rushed to my side, her hand gripping mine, her voice a desperate whisper. "Anya, come with me. Let's go." But I couldn't move. I was a statue, frozen in the wreckage of my life. That night, I returned alone to our sprawling apartment overlooking the Moskva River. The sleek, modern space, once a symbol of our success, felt like a gilded cage, its floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting my hollow expression. I sat on the edge of our king-sized bed, staring at the diamond ring on my finger, its facets catching the dim light of a single lamp. It was a gift from Dmitri on our 5th anniversary, a flawless stone set in platinum, a symbol of love that now felt like a shackle. He didn't come home. He didn't call. The silence was deafening, broken only by the distant hum of the city and the relentless replay of his words in my mind. "I wish you had never been in my life." I traced the edges of the ring, my fingers trembling, and thought of the man I'd fallen in love with, the Dmitri who had danced with me in St. Petersburg, who had promised me a life of adventure, who had kissed me under the northern lights in Murmansk. Where had he gone? And who was this stranger who had stood before me tonight, dismantling our life in front of everyone we knew? As dawn broke, painting the sky in shades of gray and lavender, something inside me snapped, not with grief, but with resolve. I wasn't the naive girl Dmitri had met all those years ago. I was a woman who had survived loss, my parents' death in a car accident when I was 17, the years of building a life from nothing. If Dmitri wanted me out of his life, I would give him exactly that. But I would do it on my terms, in a way that would make him regret ever speaking those words. The next morning, I moved with a clarity I hadn't felt in years. The fog of shock had lifted, replaced by a steely determination that coursed through my veins like fire. I called Mikhail, our family lawyer, a quiet man with graying hair and a reputation for discretion. His office was a sanctuary of mahogany and leather, the air heavy with the scent of old books and cigar smoke. I sat across from him, my hands steady despite the storm in my chest. "Sell everything," I told him, my voice calm but unyielding. "The apartment in Moscow, the dacha in Sochi, the flat in London, all the accounts. Liquidate it all." Mikhail's eyes widened, his pen pausing over his notepad, his usually composed face betraying a flicker of shock. "Anastasia, this is drastic," he said, his voice trembling. "Are you sure? This is your entire life." I met his gaze, my eyes hard. "It was our life, Mikhail. Now it's his problem. Do it. Today." By noon, I was a whirlwind of action, fueled by a mix of rage and survival instinct. I sat at Dmitri's desk in his study, a room I'd rarely entered, its dark wood panels and locked drawers a silent barrier between us for years. The study smelled of his cologne, sandalwood and cedar, a scent that once comforted me but now turned my stomach. I closed our joint bank accounts, transferred my personal savings to an offshore account I'd set up 3 years ago, a precaution I'd taken when Dimitri's late-night business calls started to feel secretive, his explanations vague and dismissive. I sorted through our belongings with ruthless efficiency, leaving behind the designer dresses from Paris, the sapphire necklaces from Dubai, the trappings of a life that no longer felt mine. In a small, weathered suitcase, I packed essentials, a few practical outfits, a worn copy of Anna Karenina that had belonged to my mother, its pages yellowed from years of reading, and a faded photo of my parents, their smiles frozen in time. They had been my anchor, and now, in their absence, I was my own. By evening, the papers were signed, the house was listed, and the accounts were drained. I stood in the empty apartment one last time, the Moskva River glittering below like a ribbon of liquid silver. The city's lights stretched endlessly before me, a reminder of the life I was leaving behind. I felt a strange sense of liberation, as if I were shedding a skin that no longer fit. I was erasing myself from Dimitri's world, and it felt like reclaiming my own. I didn't leave a note. Dimitri didn't deserve one. Let him wonder. Let him search. Let him feel the void I'd left behind. Let him choke on it. I took a train to St. Petersburg, a city woven into the fabric of my past, its canals and golden spires a bittersweet reminder of who I'd been. It was where Dimitri and I had met in 2003, at a university gala in a grand hall overlooking the Neva River. I was a literature student, 21 and full of dreams, captivated by his ambition, his dreams of building an empire. He was a young entrepreneur with a fire in his eyes, his laughter warm and infectious. We danced under the chandeliers, the room spinning as he whispered promises of a life together. Now, as the train rattled through the Russian countryside, its fields dusted with early snow, those memories felt like a betrayal. How had we become strangers? How had love turned to poison? In St. Petersburg, I rented a small apartment in a nondescript building near the Neva, using a false name, Elena Petrova. I dyed my dark hair blonde, the harsh chemicals stinging my scalp as I watched my reflection transform in a cracked bathroom mirror. I traded my elegant wardrobe for simple sweaters, jeans, and a pair of glasses to alter my appearance. I blended into the city's rhythm, working as a freelance translator to cover my expenses, my days filled with academic papers and legal documents. But my nights were consumed by questions. Why had Dimitri said those words? Was it a moment of anger or something deeper? I remembered the locked drawers in his study, the cryptic phone calls he'd take behind closed doors, the way his eyes would dart away when I asked about his business trips to Dubai, London, or Istanbul. There was a secret buried in our marriage, a shadow I'd ignored for too long, and I was determined to uncover it. I needed answers, and I knew I couldn't find them alone. I hired Ivan, a private investigator with a weathered face, gray stubble, and a past in the FSB. His reputation for digging up secrets was unmatched, and his gruff demeanor suggested he'd seen the worst of humanity and come out unscathed. We met in a dimly lit cafe on Nevsky Prospect, the hum of St. Petersburg muffled by rain-streaked windows. The air smelled of espresso and damp wool, the tables filled with students and old men playing chess. I slid an envelope of cash across the table, my hands steady despite the weight of what I was asking. Find out everything about Dmitri Volkov, I instructed, my voice low. His business, his contacts, his life. Leave no stone unturned. Ivan's eyes narrowed, his fingers brushing the envelope as he lit a cigarette, the smoke curling between us. "This won't be cheap," he said, his voice rough as gravel. "Men like Volkov don't leave clean trails." I met his gaze, unflinching. "I don't care about the cost. Just find the truth." Weeks passed, each day a delicate balance of anonymity and obsession. I lived quietly as Elena Petrova, translating academic papers by day, my fingers flying over the keyboard in my cramped apartment. By night, I pored over Ivan's reports, each one a piece of a puzzle I was desperate to solve. His findings painted a chilling picture. Volkov Industries, Dmitri's construction empire, was a labyrinth of legitimate contracts and shadowy deals. Ivan uncovered ties to organized crime, money laundering through offshore accounts in the Caymans, black market shipments disguised as construction materials, and connections to powerful figures in Moscow's underworld, men whose names were whispered in fear. Dmitri wasn't just a businessman. He was a puppet master in a dangerous game, moving pieces I'd never seen, manipulating lives with the ease of a chess grandmaster. Then came the photos. Ivan slid them across the table during one of our clandestine meetings, his expression unreadable behind a haze of cigarette smoke. They showed Dmitri with a woman, tall, brunette, with sharp cheekbones and a smile that seemed to cut through the lens. Her name was Katya Morozova, a lawyer with her own ties to the criminal network, her reputation as ruthless as it was discreet. They'd been seen together at exclusive clubs in Moscow, hotels in Paris, even our dacha in Sochi, a place I'd once considered our sanctuary, where we'd spent lazy summers sipping wine by the Black Sea, the air heavy with the scent of pine and salt. The photos captured moments of intimacy, Dmitri's hand on her arm, her head tilted close to his, their laughter shared in secret. My stomach churned as I studied the images, each one a dagger to my heart. Was this why he'd humiliated me? To clear the way for her? To rewrite our story with her as the leading lady? "Is he in love with her?" I asked Ivan, my voice barely above a whisper, my fingers clutching the photos so tightly they creased. He exhaled a plume of smoke, his eyes hard. "Love? Maybe. But with men like Dmitri, it's always about power. Katya's not just a mistress. She's a partner in his world. She's dangerous, Anastasia. More than you know." I couldn't let it go. Back in my apartment, I hacked into Dmitri's old email account, a relic from our university days when he used predictable passwords like Neva 2003. The login worked, and what I found was a goldmine of betrayal. Emails to Katya, written in coded language, hinted at a plan. "The anniversary will be the end," one read, sent a week before our celebration. "She won't see it coming." Another mentioned a deal, a shipment worth millions, set to happen soon. My name appeared in fragments, always with a tone of contempt. "Anastasia's too naive," one email read. "She'll never suspect." Another was more cryptic. "Once she's gone, we're free." My hands trembled as I read, my mind racing. Was his public rejection a calculated move, a way to push me out before something bigger unfolded? Was I a liability in his world of secrets? The questions gnawed at me, but one thing was clear. I wasn't safe. Not in St. Petersburg, not anywhere Dmitri's reach could find me. I knew I had to disappear completely. St. Petersburg, with its familiar canals and ghosts of my past, was no longer safe. I chose a remote village in Siberia, a place so isolated it felt like the edge of the world. The journey was grueling, hours on a train through snow-dusted plains, followed by a rattling bus that groaned under the weight of its own age. The village was a cluster of wooden cabins nestled among pine trees, their branches heavy with snow. I rented one under yet another name, Maria Kuznetsova, paying in cash to a grizzled landlord who barely looked at me. The cabin was sparse, with a single bed, a wood-burning stove, and a window that framed the endless white of the Siberian winter. The air smelled of pine and frost, and the silence was profound, broken only by the crackle of the fire and the occasional howl of the wind. It was a far cry from the luxury of Moscow, but it suited my purpose. I wasn't hiding. I was strategizing. I lived simply, blending in with the locals who spent their days tending to livestock or hauling firewood. I wore heavy coats and scarves, my blonde hair tucked away, my glasses fogging in the cold. I learned to chop wood, to boil water over the stove, to navigate the village's single store for supplies. The harshness of the landscape mirrored the coldness in my heart, but it also gave me clarity. I spent my days reading Dostoevsky, Tolstoy, anything to keep my mind sharp, and planning my next move. Ivan kept me informed through encrypted messages, his updates arriving sporadically through a satellite phone I'd bought for emergencies. Dmitri was unraveling, he said. The sale of our assets had blindsided him. His business partners were furious, their trust in him eroding as their profits vanished. Katya was pressuring him to find me, her emails laced with paranoia and venom. "He thinks you're dead," Ivan said during one call, his voice crackling through the static. "He's telling people you ran off and killed yourself, driven mad by his rejection." The lie stung, but it was a gift. If Dmitri believed I was gone, he'd lower his guard. I used the time to dig deeper, piecing together the fragments of his plan. Ivan's latest report revealed the truth. Dmitri and Katya were orchestrating a massive deal, a shipment of illegal goods through Volkov Industries, disguised as construction materials. The cargo was worth millions, a fortune that would secure their escape from Russia. Once the deal was complete, they planned to vanish, leaving behind Dmitri's debts, his enemies, and the wreckage of his empire. My public humiliation was a distraction, a way to make my disappearance seem like the act of a broken woman, not a calculated escape. The world would pity me, mourn me, and forget me, while Dmitri and Katya slipped away into a new life. But there was more. Ivan found a file, buried deep in a server Dmitri thought was secure. It was a contract, a kill order, with my name on it, dated the day after our anniversary. The realization hit me like a freight train. If I hadn't left Moscow, I'd be dead. The contract detailed a payment to an unnamed operative, with instructions to make it look like an accident. A car crash on the icy roads of Moscow, perhaps, or a fall from our apartment's balcony. My hands shook as I read Ivan's transcription, the words blurring through tears I hadn't realized I was shedding. Dmitri hadn't just wanted me gone. He'd wanted me erased, my existence wiped clean to protect his secrets. I couldn't stay in Siberia forever. The cold had preserved me, sharpened my resolve, but it was time to act. I returned to Moscow under the cover of darkness, my blonde hair hidden beneath a scarf, my glasses discarded. I wasn't the same Anastasia who had stood frozen on that stage, humiliated and broken. I was sharper, colder, forged in the fire of betrayal and survival. Ivan had tracked the shipment to a warehouse on the city's outskirts, a sprawling complex surrounded by barbed wire and guarded by men with hard eyes and hidden weapons. The deal was happening tonight, the culmination of Dmitri's plan to escape his life, and mine. I slipped into the warehouse, my heart pounding against my ribs. The air was thick with the smell of oil, metal, and something acrid I couldn't place. Chemicals, perhaps, or the tang of fear. Crates were stacked high under flickering fluorescent lights, their contents labeled innocuously as construction supplies. Armed guards patrolled the perimeter, their footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. I moved like a shadow, my training from Ivan, basic surveillance techniques he'd taught me in Siberia, guiding my steps. He'd shown me how to blend in, how to listen without being seen, how to stay calm under pressure. Now, those lessons were my lifeline. In a corner of the warehouse, I saw Dmitri and Katya, their voices low but tense. Dmitri's face was drawn, his usual confidence replaced by a nervous edge, his hands fidgeting with a pen. Katya stood close, her hand on his arm, her eyes scanning the room like a predator. "She's gone," Dmitri said, his tone bitter, his voice carrying a hint of relief. "Good riddance." Katya's laugh was sharp, cutting through the air like glass. "You should have done it years ago. She was always a liability, dragging you down with her sentimentality." I recorded every word on a hidden device, a tiny recorder tucked into my coat pocket, my hands steady despite the rage boiling inside me. Their words confirmed everything. My humiliation was a performance, a way to push me out before the deal could unfold. I'd paid Ivan's contacts, former FSB operatives with their own grudges, to tip off the authorities, an anonymous but precise alert about illegal activity at the warehouse. As Dmitri and Katya finalized their deal, signing papers with a man in a dark coat whose face I couldn't see, sirens wailed in the distance. The guards scrambled, shouting orders, their guns drawn. Dmitri's face paled, his eyes darting to Katya, who cursed under her breath, her composure cracking. The police swarmed the warehouse, their flashlights cutting through the darkness, their voices barking commands. "Hands up! On the ground!" I slipped out through a side exit, my heart racing but my mind clear. I'd done what I came to do. The next morning, Moscow woke to chaos. "Tycoon arrested in massive sting operation," the headlines screamed across every news channel, from Rossiya 1 to international outlets like BBC. Dmitri's face was plastered on screens, his polished image replaced by a haggard man in handcuffs. Katya was named as his accomplice, her smug smile gone, her mugshot showing fear in her eyes. The news called it one of the biggest busts in recent history, a blow to Moscow's underworld that would ripple for years. My recordings, Ivan's files, and the seized shipment, chemicals and weapons hidden in crates of cement, provided the evidence to bury them both. I watched it all unfold from a small cafe in Paris, my new home. The Siberian village, the blonde hair, the aliases, they were gone. I was Anastasia again, but not the woman Dmitri had known. I sipped my coffee, the Seine sparkling under the morning sun, its waters a mirror for my thoughts. My phone buzzed with messages from Natasha, who had thought I was dead until I sent her a postcard from Paris, its image of the Eiffel Tower a quiet promise. "I'm alive," it read, "and I'm free." She'd cried when we finally spoke, her voice breaking over the phone as she begged me to come home. "Anya, please," she'd said. "You don't have to do this alone." But Moscow wasn't home anymore. Paris was a fresh start, a city where I could rebuild, where the weight of my past felt lighter under the glow of its lights. I rented a small apartment in Montmartre, its windows overlooking cobblestone streets and artists' studios, the air filled with the scent of fresh baguettes and blooming jasmine. By day, I worked as a translator, my skills honed in St. Petersburg, now serving a new life. By night, I walked the Seine, the city's lights dancing on the water, and thought of Dmitri. Did he regret those words, spoken to wound me in front of the world? Did he know I'd outplayed him, turning his betrayal into his downfall? The thought brought a fleeting smile, but it faded quickly. Freedom came with a shadow. Dmitri's world was vast, and men like him had long memories and longer reaches, even from prison. I kept Ivan on retainer, my eyes and ears in Moscow. I also kept one final secret: the offshore account, now swollen with the money I'd siphoned from Dmitri's accounts before I vanished. It was my insurance, my new beginning, a fortune that would let me live on my terms. A month later, Ivan called, his voice low and urgent through the encrypted line. "There's a rumor," he said, pausing as if weighing his words. "Dmitri's men are looking for a woman. Blonde, glasses, last seen in St. Petersburg. They don't know it's you, but they're close. They're asking questions, Anastasia. Dangerous questions." I hung up, my pulse quickening. I stood on my balcony, the Parisian night wrapping around me like a cloak, the city's lights a stark contrast to the darkness closing in. I glanced at the new passport in my bag, its pages crisp with a different name, a different life waiting to be claimed. Dmitri had wished me out of his life, but I was still here, a ghost he couldn't escape. I'd survived his betrayal, his lies, his attempt to erase me. But the game wasn't over. Somewhere in the shadows of Moscow, his world was stirring, and I knew I'd have to face it again. And I was ready for whatever came next.